Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes,
Board first.
we ready?
Yes, we are.
All right. Thank you. My name is Jill Kamnitz, and with Dr. Holmes Stein, I have the pleasure of chairing the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. We start with 2 action items today. The first one, SLA 1, is CTE Essential Standards course inventory. We discussed this last month. This comes from a continuing effort to align our CTE work with Perkins 5. Mr. Michael, anything to point out here? Any change?
Good afternoon to you all. The only thing that we will actually need to modify on this document is we have confirmed the course number for Metals Manufacturing 3. So I'll be replacing the X beside that with a 3. That's all.
All right. That's a change in the good direction.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. The second item is SLA 2, the Read to Achieve Guidebook. This guidebook is an update. This version is an update from the 2017 guidebook. And I believe there's been some changes from what we saw last month. So I'm going to ask Ms. Parrish to go through that with us, and I'll just say that I know that all the folks out in the field are anxious to receive the guidance that passing this is going to provide for them. So Ms. Parrish, if you'll go ahead and walk through.
So this is Amy Wright. I'm going to get us started.
Sorry.
I'm going to get us started if that's okay.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to say good afternoon to Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, members of the board, colleagues, and stakeholders. I think there's a little bit of an echo. Shannon, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your time today as we come to you on behalf of the Office of Early Learning to present and discuss the 2020 Read to Achieve Guidebook and answer any questions that you may have. Our main goal is to ensure that we have aligned the guidebook to legislation and state board policy, and then we also want to clearly define the information for schools and stakeholders. I want to start today by defining our why.
Dr. Ryan, if I
Yes,
can
ma'am.
pause for a minute because we've got some kind of interference going on. I wonder
I hear that.
if everyone could check their audio and mute. All right, let's try again.
This better?
Yeah, that sounds a little better.
Okay, thank you. So I want to begin by starting with our why, and the guidebook was created to provide clarification and support for the North Carolina educators aligned to the Read to Achieve legislation requirements. The guidance is broken down into roles and responsibilities for each stakeholder in order to focus on supporting successful reading outcomes for all K-3 students. And this is exceptionally important right now in this very unique time where we have various learning environments and we also have multiple vendors across our state. Several of our key stakeholders we have identified who would benefit from this guidance, but it's certainly not limited to, might include the district and school leaders, teachers and staff, and even parents during these times for our earliest learners. And our goal is to have this resource available to our stakeholders as soon as possible so that we can use it as a resource throughout the year to inform instructional decisions pertaining to Read to Achieve and the K-3 assessments. At this time, Tanya Parrish, who's been instrumental in leading this work, is going to share more in depth what you might find in the document and the brief list of changes that were made, as well as an example of one component that's simplified for stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Amy. So as we continue to look through, I wanted just to bring out in policy KNEC-003, this is where the guidebook, once it is approved, will be linked within this policy. So this will need to be updated with the correct link once that guidebook is approved. As mentioned earlier, this presentation is, we took the last guidebook that was approved by the state board, which was the 2017 edition of the guidebook, and we did a side-by-side comparison of the current newly advised 2020 edition of the guidebook. So we took those and went page by page and did a side-by-side comparison. For each of you today, you have been provided with the comparison chart. You will notice as we went through page by page, we have indicated any changes that were made from the last approved edition, which was to 2017. So currently the 2020, if there were any deletions or any additions, those are available for you in a link right there so that you can see exactly everything that has been changed or corrected, updated. I wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of show you a brief snapshot of what the inside of the guidebook looks like. So as Amy mentioned earlier when she went over our who and our what, we wanted you to also see that the way we took the guidebook is that we looked at each legislative component. So we know with Read to Achieve, there is an overview of the 7 RTA components within legislation. So we took each of those components as the legislative component and we broke it down into the guidebook. So you will see component 1 through 7. As an example here, I have component 3. So we listed the legislative component, and then we went through and we identified our stakeholders and the obligation of each of those stakeholders. So you'll see, for example, component number 3, facilitating early grade reading proficiency. We've listed what the state is responsible for, what the LEA is responsible for, then all the way down to the school level, what they are responsible for, and then our teachers. And so we wanted it to be very clear, and we wanted it to be this resource as a guidebook. You know, all stakeholders, when they go to it, they can clearly see each of the components, and they can clearly see as well as what each stakeholder is responsible for. So we wanted to make sure that when we think about why we have this guidebook, it is to provide a guide for leaders with RTA legislation and the K-3 diagnostic formative assessment, and to make sure that everybody has that clear expectation of what is required of us and our goals as we strive to meet the needs of all of our K-3 students. So at this time, if there are any questions, we are happy to answer those. We thank you so much for taking time to look through each of these documents, and we look forward to having your approval and getting this approved so that we can provide it to all of our stakeholders. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I should have been asking that question, but thank you, Dr. Ryan and Ms. Parrish, very much. I heard no questions, so we'll move on to the discussion items. SLA 3, Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee report on broadening access and successful broaden access and successful administration. Goodness, my words keep moving in front of my face. Broaden access and successful participation in advanced courses. I believe this is Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Camnitz. Happy November, everyone. Today, we will be reviewing the report that you have fully on eBoard and taking you through some of the highlights and really taking you back to the COVID time of pre-summer. I do have with me today, I want to introduce to you, this will be her first time speaking to the board, our state consultant in this area, Elizabeth Frost. Sorry about that. Dana, can you hear me? I'm not sure what's going on. Okay. Great. We have Beth Cross with us, who has been in North Carolina Public Schools for 25 years and has been here at the department for a couple of years. And she's going to take you through the first part of the presentation, and then I'll come back and finish up with the data for you. Typically, those of you that are members with us for a long time, you know, we usually have our College Board AP Partnership Director with us, and we're actually going to have her come next month. So you have some time to process the information, and then you're able to ask her specific questions next month. So Beth?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. In today's presentation, we are honored to provide for you an overview of the report we have assembled for the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, as well as our North Carolina Advanced Placement, International Baccalaureate, and Cambridge data. So much has happened since our school closures in March. So we'll take a closer look, as Sneha mentioned, at the impact of COVID-19. And lastly, because our goals cannot be accomplished without looking ahead and finding more ways to broaden access, we will share next steps and our ideas for continued improvement. Now, we are fortunate to work in a state that has legislation focused on broadening access to advanced courses. We all know through research, but also our professional experiences in education, that successfully completing advanced courses will increase the quality and level of students' preparation. And this means for whatever post-secondary career path they choose and in their pursuit of higher education. This legislation has for 6 years provided structures for this work with advanced courses. And there are 3 goals for this legislation, because the path to equity and excellence involves more than a statement of what we believe and building upon the structures provided by the legislation through actions such as building capacity for success, ensuring access by removing barriers, and more supports for equity and excellence. So let's start with building capacity. How we are building capacity. The legislation supports a contract which has established the North Carolina AP Partnership, which serves as a liaison between the College Board and the Department of Public Instruction. There's guidance which focuses the partnership's work to provide professional development and resources to the entire state, with an additional focus on target districts, of which we have 21 primarily low-performing districts. North Carolina AP Partnership team of 3 provides technical assistance with districts walking side by side through whatever is needed. It could be a data dive into the district and school data, walkthroughs before last March in classrooms to identify strategies to replicate, and intentional professional development. They offer scholarships in addition for AP Summer Institute training. This last summer, supporting over 600 AP teachers who attended the virtual AP Summer Institutes across the state. They also have assisted with attendance at the annual conference until this year, and AP mentoring, which is a year-long partnership for newer AP teachers in certain subjects. The team is very busy these days, and since COVID have actually, because of the ease of getting around the state a little bit better virtually, they've actually been able to reach more of our North Carolina districts each week. So we'll move to ensuring access to advanced courses for which there is a fee to participate in the final exam calls for funding. And we appreciate this inclusion in the state budget each year, as this in itself removes barriers for students and families. It is the low-hanging fruit, you might say, that showed great gains immediately as a result of this legislation and funding provided, which Sneha will share in a minute. As you can see, here are the funding totals for the 2020 AP, IB, and ACE exams, and this funding has been in place since 2014. In addition to funding, we realize that increasing the course availability was an important step in ensuring access. If we'll just go back one more slide. Thank you, Deanna. Districts offer local advanced courses, and the North Carolina Virtual Public School and North Carolina School of Science and Math are great partners for this work. We also have further collaborated with Career and Technical Education, as there are so far a couple of AP courses which pair really nicely within CTE pathways. We are in the beginning of this work that shows promise in expanding opportunities for students instead of providing conflicting opportunities. I will now turn it over to Ms. Shaw Coltrane to discuss the supports for equity and excellence and much data.
Thanks so much, Beth. So the last piece of this foundational work is really aligned and has been aligned to your mission and now to your strategic vision and your strategic plan. So of course, with goal 1 about eliminating opportunity gaps by 2025, it's actually a specific objective directly related to this work. And also it ties very nicely into your goal 3 about increasing educator preparedness, which really works well with all of the professional development that is being provided. I now get the distinct pleasure to kind of tell you a story about this year's data. It's fascinating, and I think you'll be pleased to see some of them. Some of them will not be won't surprise you, but how we compare to the nation, I believe, is a great testament to our North Carolina public schools and all of the leadership by all of our leaders, including all of you, have provided. So the first one has to do with this upcoming year's enrollment. We have been, the last couple of years, if you recall, had a slight decrease in our enrollment to AP. We do have a little bit of an increase this year, so that's positive. We'll take that, and we're very pleased with that we're slowly turning that back up in the way that we would like to go. In the next slide, you'll also see we did include some of the IB and Cambridge information for you. We did have continued a little bit of a decrease in IB. We do have 30 diploma program high schools, and so we had a slight decrease in that. But we also had a pretty significant increase for Cambridge, which is a growing program, especially out of Charlotte, with 2 high schools. So, we'll take that in context. So just wanted to share those actual course enrollments. Deanna, the next slide is a duplicate by mistake. I do apologize if you can skip over that. That was my error. So now I want to take you on a slight time machine trip back to March. So March to May, because we were in a different kind of response, right? An emergency response of COVID. And so if we kind of go back, I want to place for you the impact of COVID-19 on the exams and kind of share with you what each partner did for our students. The College Board, I will say, went above and beyond. I have thanked their leadership over and over across the country. They really did their best to immediately get their exams fully online, as well as assisted schools and students with devices. They helped students do that, and we were very grateful for that support and dedication for that. With their release of AP 2019 last year, if you recall, it's this whole incredible curriculum package that they released last fall, which came in great use in March because it afforded the College Board a way to really help have live AP courses, because that curriculum package is so detailed and offers personalizable kind of planning for each student, but also a clear outline of the course with materials. They were able to pick up and actually provide live classes to students. Even though our teachers kept teaching, but let's say that there was a situation where that didn't work, our students also had that. So we're super grateful for that. IB and Cambridge both changed their final exams to focus more on the cumulative work throughout the year. And so they looked at their internal assessments and portfolios. So while they did not have AP actual exams online, they still had an exam. And so our students were able to still qualify for credits at college. And we're very grateful to the UNC system that worked with us at our office, as well as both organizations, to ensure our enrollment managers understood that the changes did not mean lack of credit, and that continued. So just to help you understand where we were there. So now let's dig into the data. So let's first start with AP. You have a lot more information in the actual report, but I'm just gonna highlight some here for you, and Deanna, when you get a chance, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So we did have a decrease back in May of exam takers. I was actually quite pleased. It was only 5%. That's what I was hearing, but I honestly, last May, Beth and I kept talking to districts. We were a little afraid we were going to get a larger decrease. And I will say our decrease is less than the national decrease. Nationally, we saw closer to 7%. And here in our state, we had 5% decrease. So I think that's kudos that we outperformed the nation here. I will also share with you, if you see the third bullet, we only had a 0.3% decrease in the scoring of 3 or more, which means that is huge under, with all of the COVID challenges that our students were facing and our teachers were facing. To see that those that were able to access the exams, that they really basically had no change, I think is pretty incredible. So wanted to highlight that for you. Now let's go to the next slide. That actually is my favorite slide. And every year, the last several, I've been able to bring this news to you and how we continue to outpace the nation, this time even during COVID, when it comes to our subgroups. And this is work that we've been focused on for a few years and just really underscores the incredible work our state is doing. And now when we really have this focused effort on equity and excellence, I could not be more pleased to bring this to you. So we did have a decrease of 6% with our Black student exam takers. But nationwide, there was a 17% decrease. And so I share that to you because everything is relative. And thinking back to this, to know that our state is moving in this right direction, I'm very pleased to share with you. I will also say that we outpaced the nation when it comes to the success of scores. So, the first step over the last few years was to increase access. And now it's to also focus on successful participation. And we're just so pleased to report that we had a 7% increase in our successful scores at 3 or more, compared to the 6% increase nationwide. Our Hispanic AP exam takers also had outpaced the nation, if you can say outpaced, I guess, decreased 4%, compared to nationwide 14%. So I know we still had a decrease, but in light of COVID, I just think, it's brought tears to my eyes when I saw this, Beth and I, that we still were able to maintain success more than the rest of the country. And then look at this. Our Hispanic students had an increase of 4% with their scores of 3 or more. And nationwide, it was 0.1. So if we look at this, and this has happened for several years. You remember a few years ago, we were double digits compared to the nation. So when we look at this effort and all of our work, the department's work, our teachers' work, our district's work, and the state board's work, and just the incredible focus on increasing access and excellence is really just something I wanted to just bring a smile to my face to know what's happening out there. Even more better, let's go to the target districts. So the target districts do get even more specific. They get individualized support. And next week, next month, Kathleen will get into a lot about what they do with this. We have had some low performing districts that have chosen not to participate. So every 2 years, we ask them. If we have more space, we bring on other low performing districts. But overall, we have quite a few low performing districts here. And let's look at these numbers. We had an increased exam takers of 7.38%. We had an increase in the numbers of exams taken, even in COVID. And then if I was with you, I would be doing a happy dance in front of the podium. Look at this, 20% increase for our districts, the number of exams scoring 3 or more. I have goosebumps. I'm too tired to do a happy dance today, but I do have goosebumps. So if we look at this, what this shows us is when you have access, professional development, both of what we've talked about today, Matt and also Matt and Maureen and lots of folks have been talking about this, the idea of this professional development, right? And a focus, and we take away the access issues of money. It's amazing what we can do over time. And I am just so pleased to bring this to you and just so proud that even through COVID, there were some positive outcomes for their success later, because all of this will turn into college credit. So we do have some IB data for you this year. Thanks to Ms. Kamnitz for making sure we shared that. We always increase, we've gotten better with IB exam data. We do have 30 high schools, so our IB exams, again, we're pleased. We had increases both here with the 80%, with the percent takers for 4 or higher, and then as well as the number of tests also both went up. So again, we're seeing that. We don't have as sophisticated data yet. We are working on with IB to get you more disaggregated data, but overall, we're super pleased with this. Cambridge, we don't have a lot of data yet to share. They're just brand new. Their exams are kind of starting to pick up, so we'll bring that back to you when we do. So when we think of impacts, right? So we have all of this. I want to kind of share with you some of our thoughts kind of in the closing remarks is, why? I'm sure a lot of you have said, well, why has this happened? One, I do believe the new teacher readiness and support materials, the incredible curriculum materials that College Board last year released for every single course has, in my opinion, removed the barriers for teachers. We talk about removing barriers for students a lot, but it's so important to remove barriers for teachers, and especially in some of our districts that teacher retention is challenging, or they may not have as many teachers with a lot of experience teaching these higher level rigor courses. These materials really help eliminate those barriers and mitigate them. And so that I think has made a huge difference. I believe that the guarantee of UNC College credit for eligible AP and now IB exams over the last year and a half has made a huge difference. And now it is guaranteed that it's not dependent anymore if you score a 3 on AP or a 4 with IB. I will say, I do think some of the decrease has to do with other student opportunities, and we all support a multitude of opportunities, and you all know Career and College Promise keeps also increasing, and so that's a good thing. But I do think when we anecdotally talk to some districts, that some of those students are choosing that other pathway, and that is okay. But we do think that has impacted the number. I do think for IB, the cost of the programming is starting to catch up with our districts. Often I have at least 10% of conversations with districts about how to keep continuing funding that, because IB and Cambridge are both school-wide programs. And so it's a significant cost outside of the test. So I do believe that. And I do think some of it has issues of COVID. But we talked about, the impact on COVID on our state students was significantly less than the country. And for that, I remain incredibly grateful for the hard work of our teachers and our students and their families. The next steps, we will continue to work on removing barriers and systemic issues limiting access. That is something we're constantly working with our districts on. We will continue synergizing programs. This whole new initiative with Trey and CTE is fantastic. We're looking at AP stats and lots of other courses and how they can really integrate and synergize with other programs in our department. And continue to really look at how do we get quality professional development. And that is just so important. But I think we are continue to be on the right path after about 5 or 6 years of this program. I hope we will be able to continue it. It's in the recurring budget, and so that's a good thing. And we're seeing just some great positive gains, even in COVID. Ms. Kamnitz, that brings an end to our presentation.
Well, before I open it up for questions, I have to say, judging from the chat room, if we all were on video today, there'd be a lot of happy dancing going on out there. Yay! And a quick question. So the funding for the AP partnership right now, is it $2 million?
Yes, ma'am. It's $2 million for the actual contract for them to do professional development and all of the scholarships and PD. And then we do get additional funding for the test fees. So those are 2 separate pots of money.
What would be the impact if we could manage to increase that item a little bit, the $2 million?
I think you would have a lot more districts who would want to become a target district, and the College Board would be able to provide significantly more support for those districts, as well as statewide support. More scholarships for teachers to go to an AP institute, more mentoring experiences for our most challenged course areas where you have experienced AP teachers from around the country work with our less experienced teachers. So I do think the impact will be great. I think 2 years ago, there was an increase and they were able to hire an additional staff person. I think that increased as well, the impact. And so I do believe more funding would increase the program.
All right, something to think about. Any other questions for either Ms. Shaw Coltrane or Ms. Cross?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
This is Mr. Ford. May I proceed?
Sir.
Thank you so much. Sneha, I know that you know, and I know that you know that I know you've been working on this for a very long time, and have been really making marked gains prior even to our strategic plan adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that particularly when we look at the subgroup data, I really do think that that's worthy of some celebration here. And I just want to publicly appreciate you because I think this is one of the areas of equity and opportunity gap closures. And frankly, given COVID, some real harm reduction, right, by comparison to the rest of the nation. That's worthy of celebration. So I just want to publicly say thank you to you and your team for working on this. North Carolina, as we march, ever closer to trying to equalize opportunity for students. This is one of those areas, access to rigorous courses, that I think your work is really starting to bear fruit. And so I just wanted to say thank you for all the hard work you're doing, especially in this environment, to have produced those sort of data, not just in test taking, but also in scores of 3 or greater in subgroups. So I just wanted to say that very briefly.
James, that means the world to me and my entire team. Hand in hand, we will continue to address the disproportional impact of advanced learning and gifted education and the inequities that we see there that are reflected in society. And I do believe that advanced coursework and programming, K-12, is one of the biggest factors we can do to impact equity and excellence and talent development.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Anyone else? Hearing no further questions, thank you for a great report.
You are most welcome, Ms. Kamnitz. Thank you.
Moving on to SLA 4, which is every other year we are required to report to the North Carolina General Assembly on statewide administration of the testing program. So Dr. Howard, I will let you take the microphone.
Thank you and good afternoon to everyone. As Ms. Kamnitz noted, there is a requirement in general statute that we report to the Joint Education Oversight Committee every year on the assessments that are administered statewide in the state. And then also we collect information from the local districts on the tests that they're administering locally. And all of this information is compiled and is available on our website. If we could go to slide 3, this is the depth of information that is available, whether you're looking at the statewide assessments or the local assessments. Both of these, all of this information is provided, and you can see it's quite an extensive list, and it's intended to give an opportunity for parents and other stakeholders to have access to the tests that are required by the state, as well as the tests that are being delivered locally. So when you look at the report that is attached to this item, this first part is something that we have done for a few years now, and you'll be very familiar with it. The first part addresses statewide assessments. The second part goes into more detail on the locally administered assessments. What is new this year is, if we go the next slide, what is new is a requirement that, based on a previous 2-year average of the number of tests that the locals are administering locally, they are averaged for a statewide average. And those districts that exceed the statewide average have to support a plan to reduce their local testing to the Department of Public Instruction and to the State Board of Education. And there are 2 aspects that are looked at here. One is the number of tests that are administered locally, and 2 is the number of hours, or if you will, the amount of time that is spent on assessments that are administered locally. This is the first year that we've had to do this. This is an even numbered year. So you will expect to see this aspect of this part of the report in subsequent even numbered years as we go forward. With this being the first year, I think it would be helpful to think of this as a baseline. As you'll see as we walk through the next few slides, those that are above the state average, they have completed their plans and they are addressing locally ways to reduce testing, and maybe, to be more deliberate, not necessarily to reduce testing for the sake of reducing it, but to make sure that it is deliberate. So the first part that we will look at is the state average for the number of tests that are administered. And you can see we took the number that had been reported for 2018-19 and 2019-20, and we came up with an average of 111.7 that were administered across the state. So then, of course, we looked at the 115 LEAs, and we identified those that were above that state average, and it was 39, which was 34% of those 115 LEAs. Now, the range of this, as you see here and on the next slide as well, goes from 1 all the way up to above to 201. And so this is the distribution, and I think this is very helpful because when we have that spread, we can see that really most LEAs are right there in the middle. That high number, that's an extreme, that's an anomaly, of course. And of course, what we would anticipate seeing is, as local tests are used, and particularly as those higher end anomalies are reduced, then we'll see this average come down as well. Again, this is the first year, so we should always consider that. The next slide addresses the number of hours. Again, the methodology was the same using those same 2 school years, and the state average was 232 hours. And of the 115 LEAs, again, it was 34%, 39 that were over that statewide average. And the extremes, we see the same issue here. with the range being from 1.8 hours to, as you can see, over 1,700 hours. And on the next slide, we have that broken out as well. And here you can see that the preponderance of districts are at the lower end of that, not at those extreme higher ends. So the takeaway from this, I think the takeaway is that this was a way to give a comparison, if you will, for local use, for their reflection upon the assessments that they administer within their local control. And in the plans, we went through and looked at their plans, their indications of what they were going to do to reduce local testing. And the districts acknowledged that what came very clearly to mind was the redundancy in assessments. And so, identifying the purpose of an assessment is very important, but to identify perhaps purposes that one assessment can serve multiple purposes, thereby reducing the amount of time that students are having to participate in assessments is very, very important. So in the report, the last part of the report addresses this local testing information that we've collected, we reported in this way, I should say, for the first time. And in the report, we do have some comments that we pulled out from the local plans. And you can see the self-reflection that is occurring as they are looking at the number of those assessments and making decisions to decrease the number of tests administered, which will subsequently reduce the amount of time spent testing. So in closing, just to remember that that is the new piece here. That, of course, this is a baseline. This is the first year, and we would anticipate seeing different numbers 2 years from now when we do this part of the report again. So with that, I'll stop, Ms. Chemnitz, and turn back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Are there any questions from the board?
Yes, Ms. Chemnitz, this is Olivia.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Howard, for that, for this information. Somehow along the way, I missed either, I don't know whether it's in legislation or maybe it is a result of policy, but this information is absolutely vital and thought-provoking. So whatever is the genesis, it doesn't matter. It's just very, very necessary. My question is this. I wonder if in your collection and analyses of the data, did you, does it break out by grade span, like elementary, middle, high school?
The second part of the report, which we've been doing in recent years, it does provide some information by grade level in the number of assessments, type of assessments that are administered by grade level. This particular aspect, the new piece that is looking at the average of the assessments, is looking at all of those assessments in the aggregate for a district.
And so in the information provided to districts about the collection, the collection and the getting the information to DPI, is there directions and explanations around formative versus summative versus a semester test, weekly test, and so on and so forth?
Yes, there is, and there's a pretty extensive directions given to the districts, and of course we're available to answer any questions that they may have, because occasionally they do have some with this regard, because as you can probably appreciate, asking someone to give a piece of information and then qualifying what we're really asking for sometimes can get confusing. So we've over the years, we're to the point now we have a very comprehensive frequently asked questions document that guides them through, so they're identifying the tasks that are really intended to be identified here. So for example, a teacher-made exam would not be included in these counts. So making that distinction is extremely important in doing this. And I would say also that this process over the few years that we have been doing this, and of course, again, the first and second part, this is probably our fourth or fifth year doing it. This is the first year for that last part of the number of hours and the number of tests. But as we have done this every year, the process does improve and becomes more precise and more consistent across the state.
And a final comment, certainly not comment / question, is I wonder if teachers see any relationship between the reduction or the sense that I cannot assess any. I really got to pay attention and pull back from assessing, and I better not do this test, or I better not do this quiz. I wonder if they sense any relationship between testing and, let's say, local testing and large scale testing like our EOCs and or EOGs.
Yeah, well, I don't know that I could answer that, but I would respond that I think that is an excellent question to ask, particularly given the context as we're all familiar with, where there is this perception of too much testing. And perhaps we could consider doing a survey or a small study as as we go through this process to see if some of those perceptions do change.
I think that would be that's a worthy, in my opinion, a worthy research question.
Yeah. Well, we will make note of that and follow up on that internally and see what we can do.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Dr. Oxentine. Good questions. Anyone else? All right, hearing none, then we'll move on to our consent items. We have four. SLA 5 is report to the NC General Assembly on the 4-year cohort graduation rate. SLA 6 is high school accreditation recommendation for John A. Holmes High School of Edenton-Chowan. SLA 7 is the JLEOC report on North Carolina high school diploma endorsements, and SLA 8 is the CTE credentials report. And we saw all of those last month. So unless there are questions on any of those, I will go on to our final item, which is a requested update on the Read to Achieve diagnostic tool or tools. And I think Dr. Stegall is going to walk us through this.
Yes, ma'am. It's great to hear from you. Hope everybody's doing well. I want to give you an update on both the process and the timeline for the Read to Achieve assessment vendor selection. As you know, DPI has this year used a multi-vendor approach, and we're working with DIT on finalizing the Read to Achieve RFP proposal. It will hopefully be ready to post for vendors by the end of November or the first week of December. Right now it's with DIT for looking at the technical specs. If we do this timeline, it will put us on track for an award nomination in April. Given there's lots of steps in between right now, and if everything goes as expected, around April there'll be a recommendation, and then the state board would vote in May. The RFP is written as the board has asked us to, excuse me, in a way that allows the state board to potentially choose a single assessment or possible multiple assessments. To our knowledge, other states have had multiple assessments for a single grade or a single subject, and they've developed growth measures for the assessment separately. In other words, in other states, schools are compared only with other schools that administered the same test. To our knowledge, there are no assessment comparisons as we're hoping to possibly do in North Carolina. Our North Carolina's approach to using multiple assessments to measure early reading should no doubt produce valid and reliable measures of student growth in reading, but there's some important issues to consider for the board when you're equating the different assessment scale scores. So each assessment, each company has different ways they provide scale scores for a student. You have to have a common anchor to measure those against so that we're speaking the same language. All those scale scores must equate to a Lexile level. That performed accurately for all vendors to make sure that what we're seeing from one company that may be a scale score of 85 is the same as another company whose scale score is 530. Their metrics don't mean as much unless we anchor it to a common language, and that would be the Lexile level. Metametrics, as you know, is a highly reputable company that does this for states, and we have no reason to anticipate any problems with the equating. This approach to using multiple assessments in a single statewide measure of growth is experimental, as the board has asked, and to DPI and SAS, to our knowledge, has never been attempted by another state. Receiving data from multiple vendors does increase some risk, but we feel like we can put in operations to mitigate that risk. So in theory, the number of vendors that are operating in the K2 reading assessment space should not have a huge effect on the validity or any effect on the validity or reliability of the growth estimates. So if the board chooses one vendor or chooses 2, 3, 4 or more, the number of vendors should not have a cumulative effect on the validity or reliability. Given the equating of disparate scale scores to a Lexile level, from SAS's perspective and from our DPI staff perspective, these are assessments would be the same as having multiple assessments would be the same as having one assessment, as long as we measure it to the Lexile level. As you know, this year you approved multiple assessments that districts could choose from. NCDPI and SAS will work with this year's current beginning of the year and middle of the year data to test our approach to measuring growth to make sure and identify any issues before we officially run the growth model from middle year to end of the year. So once we receive middle of the year data from schools, we can compare that to the beginning of the year and have data to analyze to see if there is any impact using a multiple assessment approach. To do this, assessments from the middle year have to come in, and those assessments are likely going to be the first 20 instructional days of January for most districts. So our approach to the RFP is to allow the flexibility for you as a board. As late as March, April in the process, you still will have the option of sticking with a single assessment tool or possibly a multiple assessment tool. Obviously, a single assessment tool is what we've done in the past, and it is probably the cleanest as far as execution. But we don't have a preference at the district level, or at the state level. We don't, as long as it has educational value, we want to make sure we give the districts what they need. As stated again, the RFP process is going to DIT now. By the end of the month, hopefully early December at the latest, this RFP will go out for vendors. And they'll have a period of time to ask questions and then submit their proposals, and then we'll begin the process as we do with any procurement process of having a selection team and appropriate members of the RFP team that will be analyzing and seeing demonstrations by the various assessment groups to analyze and make sure we have all the data necessary to make a recommendation to you as a board by mid-spring. And that will allow us enough time to do training for teachers, schools, staff over the last part of the spring and into the summer as we transition to next year. So I'll pause to see if there are any questions, and be glad to follow up.
Thank you, Dr. Segal, and thank you. I know we had asked you to please explore that question of a single vendor versus several vendors, and so that's really helpful information. Are there any other questions for Dr. Segal on this? All right, hearing none. Before I turn it back to Chair Davis, I would like to take a little detour quickly and just ask Dr. Segal and Dr. Emery, if she's on this call, thinking about our early presentation today and now this several items that relate to Read to Achieve takes me back to our K-3 literacy plan, our K-3 literacy plan, and some of the recommendations that we received connected to that plan over the last few months. And I wonder if I could ask the two of you or whoever the appropriate person is to start work on bringing us an implementation plan for that K-3 literacy work and a timeline, as we've seen for other major projects that DPI has undertaken, and perhaps aiming at bringing a completed plan to us in January and aiming for implementation in the fall of 2021. So if I could just ask the two of you to work on that, I would appreciate it.
I'm not sure if Dr. Emery's on the line as well, but we certainly be glad to do that and look forward to that.
Thank you, Dr. Segal. All right, Chair Davis, that concludes the SLA board.
Ms. Camnitz, can you hear me?
Yes, barely, yes, yes.
There were a couple of questions following the first update that Dr. Stegall was providing.
I wondered because I could tell that something went silent for a minute there. So I don't know what happened. So okay, let's go back. Dr. Stegall, you're not out of the hot seat yet.
No problem.
I think your question was coming from Vice Chair Duncan.
Mr. Duncan.
Can you hear Ms. Camnitz?
We can't hear. I can't hear.
You're very muted.
How about now?
Yes, sir.
We're having some technical difficulties. Deanna's keeping our head above water. The question I had, was there a number of anecdotal reports that on the initial read to achieve testing that since they were not given in person, that some of the scores were aberrationally high? And so my question really goes to, is there going to be, we're now trying to take that data with the next set of tests, which may be in person or not. Are we going to try to, if there are real aberrations in the data, will SAS throw those out as it's trying to get comparability, if you will, in all the testing? It seems like it could be a little bit challenging, and that's really the thrust of the question.
Right. Yeah. And that has certainly been, as we've spoken to several superintendents and other groups, that concern has been raised. I'm not sure if Tom Tomberlin's on the line, but we have discussed what that may look like and the possibility of what data to include and what not to include. There is concern that some of the at-home assessments, students possibly are being given some extra support, or well, I don't want to speculate, but the scores aren't in line with where the student has been in the past, and quite large jumps. Dr. Tomberlin, are you on the line?
Yes.
Could you address that question of if there's a large number of data or any data that seems askew or out of aligned with what the measures would traditionally be anticipated? How do we, is there anything to do to mitigate that?
Yes. So for all of our assessments, SAS will basically conduct an outlier test. So if students are demonstrating extreme and I mean very, very large differences from a prior testing period to the current testing period, we do a statistical test to determine if that outlier is sufficiently far away from the norm that we would deem it an outlier, and we would remove it from the analysis. So the question that's before us now, Vice Chairman Duncan, that I think you're responding to is some reports that the BOI is significantly higher than what we would expect for the grade level. For first and second graders, we can certainly apply this test. For kindergarten, it's going to be a little more problematic. And we will have to see what is actually reported in the data. We have not received the data yet, so we will have to look at that and see if there are issues there with if we're finding kindergartners reading on the 4th or 5th grade level, then that may give us some pause, and we'll just have to alert the board to any potential issues that would arise from that. But I want to be very clear, that is not related to a multi-assessment approach. That is more related to a virtual or a home administration of these assessments.
Right, that's a good point to make. Yeah, the multiple assessment model is not what's necessarily yielding outlier results. It truly is an implementation of a remote environment, and you don't have the same level of controls in a remote environment that you would face to face. And to Dr. Tomlin's point, kindergarten, we don't have any previous data to measure that against. So there could be, it's going to be different than it would be face to face. It's just the only way to say it. So we certainly want to do our best to offset some of those challenges.
All right, Mr. Duncan, any other questions?
No.
Any other board questions before I turn it back over to Chair Davis? All right, hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chemnitz. That concludes today's updates and committee reports. We'll have the remaining committee reports during tomorrow's meeting. My thanks to my board colleagues, advisors, DPI staff, and others who contributed to today's meeting. I now ask for a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the November 4th, 2020 meeting will adjourn immediately, and that we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I move that we go into closed session to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of a public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee, and protect the confidentiality of records from local school administrative units or its officers or employees, and to prevent the disclosure of privileged information under Section 147-64.6D of the North Carolina General Statutes or Regulations.
Thank you. Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. White. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White, Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. Let's take a 10-minute break and be in closed session at 3:10. 3:10. Thank you. Set up so I can work that donut off. Musical chair.